How did I get into this situation, I asked myself. Why me? What did I do to deserve this? The answer was, if I was honest with myself, that it wasn't about what I did but what I didn't do. Sound confusing to you? Yes, to me too. But now it's time to do something drastic, and damn quick, before the situation reaches a point of no return. Let's go back a little bit and I'll try to explain what happened. It all started when Veronica and I had a little too much to drink at a party. We were both 18 years old, and we were both virgins at the beginning of the party. The next morning, neither of us were virgins anymore, and Ronnie had an intruder in her womb. Of course, we didn't know this when we woke up in the same bed the next day. Ronnie and I, at least in our sober state, had never found each other attractive or thought about dating. So we exchanged a few choice phrases, and I made a hasty retreat. Hey, don't think either of us were attractive from what I just said, but beauty, as they say, is in the eye of the beholder, and Veronica and I never looked in each other's direction. There was a reason Veronica and her friends belonged to a small party that seemed to think they were God's gift to the world. They walked around with full confidence that their attitudes didn't stink, and that every other teenager in town treated their words and actions with reverence. Yeah, well, my friends and I realized a long time ago that chasing the unattainable was a waste of time, so Ronnie and her little crowd were never part of the equation. Well, after that inexplicable night, it didn't take long for Ronnie to lose her rather slim figure. Funny thing is, I only noticed Veronica's figure after an unsightly bump appeared on her tummy. Soon, pointed questions began to be asked, and unfortunately, the finger of suspicion was soon pointed in my direction. Apparently Veronica, while telling her parents about her family plans, informed them that I was the only possible candidate for the newly opened position of future father. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall during this little reveal. I doubt Veronica's parents viewed me as a likely or desirable candidate for a son-in-law. Let me say right off the bat that I first learned of Ronnie's pregnancy when I came home from work one evening and found my parents entertaining Veronica and her parents in our living room. And then things got really interesting. Look, I can't help it if I have a sick sense of humor. When Veronica's father threatened that if I didn't treat his daughter well, I would be a soprano singer forever, my mother was shocked by this news. But my father was old school and took it all calmly. What you sow is what you reap, he said. And as a man, you have to fulfill your obligations. The end result was a typical shotgun-style wedding to which I was invited as if I was the last person to be invited. Everything was decided without my input. The wedding, the furnished rented cottage we were going to live in, and the rules of behavior by which we were going to live after the wedding. These had been described by Veronica, probably by her mother, Dragon. My only contribution was to stand at the altar and say yes when I was commanded to, and then to work my stiff fingers to the bone to keep Veronica in the style she was used to. I say stiff fingers because that was the only sex I'd been able to do in a long time. God, there were only single beds in that damn cottage while she was pregnant. Ronnie was a lazy cow, to say the least. If I wanted to eat when I got home from work, I cooked myself. Ronnie, on the other hand, was at her mother's house most of the day and usually ate there. I assumed, I never asked. As it turned out, I was also responsible for keeping the house clean and tidy. Ronnie was always complaining that she was too sick or too tired. Yes, as you can guess, I didn't think our marriage would last too long, and I had no doubt that Ronnie didn't either. I thought that once the baby was born, the marriage would be far behind. After all, the baby wouldn't be a bastard, and I assumed that was all everyone was worried about at that point. But just as Veronica was approaching full term, the situation took an unexpected turn, and it snowed. Yes, the 8 freaking inches, 20 centimeters, that fell overnight was going to change literally everything. Ronnie's water broke around 5 in the morning, almost 2 weeks early. She yelled for me to call an ambulance, and I did it damn fast. I picked up the phone but found it completely disconnected. The snow had cut the line somewhere. The nearest phone was at the end of the road, about half a mile from the house. So, climbing out the window, there was a snow drift in front of the front door. I made my way through the remnants of the blizzard to the phone booth. But even there, I found that the phone didn't work. That left me with 2 options. Walk almost another mile through the snow to the neighbor's house, where I suspected the phone wasn't working either, or go back to a very frightened Veronica and get the book, The Home Doctor, which I remembered seeing on a bookshelf somewhere. Choosing the latter option, and holding the book in one hand, I turned into a very nervous midwife apprentice. I may not have been sure what I was doing, but I knew that for the sake of Ronnie and the baby, I had to act like it. Look, guys, I'm sure most of you have no idea what a child with a disability is or how to deal with it. I didn't either until I read that damn book with the date 1905 on the cover. Maybe I'm exaggerating a bit, but as far as I could tell, the baby's head wasn't up, and the little bugger didn't seem to be positioned correctly according to the book. How glad I was that the guy who wrote the damn book knew his business and went into the smallest details. Anyway, after some delicate pushing and shoving, and a certain amount of swearing and cursing that I doubted Veronica's mother could assume her darling daughter even knew, let alone use, I suddenly found myself covered in all sorts of crap I won't describe here. Some readers may have weak stomachs. And holding a cute little girl in my arms. Thankfully, the length of the umbilical cord was just long enough for me to move Megan into Ronnie's arms and turn the page of the book to find out what I should do next. The wonderful thing about these old medical books is that they assume you won't have anything on hand to complete the surgery. Modern books usually say, call the experts now. Yes, Megan, you noticed the name, didn't you? That's what I thought. I assure you, it's not my choice. I've always loved the name Otterly, and I wanted my first female child to carry that name. However, Veronica's mother's name was Megan, so I was in the minority before we even knew the baby's gender. I had just finished bathing the baby and put her back in her mother's arms when 2 police officers came through the open window in the front and went upstairs to see what was up. Before I went back to the cottage to help Ronnie give birth, I wrote the word help in big letters in the snow. An army helicopter flying over the house eventually noticed it. Before I could realize what was happening, a second helicopter flew in with a doctor, and they arranged for Ronnie and Megan to be taken to the hospital. I stayed behind because there was no room for me. I handed Megan off to one of the helicopter crew, and they were about to load the stretcher with Ronnie aboard when she asked them to stop. Ronnie gestured for me to come closer. I thought she wanted to whisper something to me, but when I leaned in to hear what she was going to say, her arms went around me. Then she pulled me toward her and pressed her lips to mine. The next moment, I realized that her tongue was already halfway down my throat, and I was about to pass out from lack of oxygen. God! Ronnie had taken me by surprise, and any air she hadn't managed to squeeze out of my lungs, she'd sucked out of them. You probably don't think that's unusual for a loving wife, and I don't think any of the guys watching it thought it was strange either, but it did to me. It was the first kiss I'd gotten from Ronnie since she pecked me on the lips on our wedding day. Thank you, and I love you, she said as I staggered away from the stretcher a few seconds later. The helicopter door slammed shut, and the car lifted into the air. I went back into the house to clean up the mess in Ronnie's bedroom. Yes, you heard me, Veronica's bedroom. As usual, in our area, the snow didn't last long. The next day, most of the snow melted, and I was able to dig the car out. Getting to work was still out of the question, but I figured I could get to the hospital to visit my newborn baby girl. Oh, and Veronica, my wife at the time, the baby interested me more than Ronnie. The little show she put on outside the helicopter for the police and military didn't fool me. When I entered the room, the 4 proud grandparents were already there, fussing over the baby. It was obvious I wasn't going to interfere, although they did ask me why I hadn't shown my face the previous evening. Oh, and of course I should have waited for the specialists to arrive, and it was my fault that Veronica had torn her birth canal during labor, requiring several stitches. Dragon never missed an opportunity to add to attack. By then, all the nonsense she was spouting was no longer settling in my head. Most of the time, I just ignored her as I approached the bed. Ronnie reached out to me. I don't know why I grabbed it, that's what people in love do, and Ronnie and I weren't in that category. Ronnie's hand caught mine, and she pulled me toward her with such force that I almost fell onto the bed with her. Then her other hand was behind my head, and she pulled our mouths to each other, trying to choke me again. I remember thinking, I could get used to this. When Ronnie decided to let me breathe again, she said, "Isn't she beautiful? She's got your nose." As I staggered and gasped to my feet. I don't know, Ronnie. I was a bit busy yesterday, running round like a blue fly. Everything's a bit of a blur. I replied. Mom, please give Otterly to her father, and Dad, get your camera out again. I want to get some pictures of John with her in his arms and of us together, Veronica ordered. But my mind was no longer hearing the instructions Ronnie was giving her father. The question swirling in my mind was, did Veronica really just name the baby Otterly? Dragon shoved the baby into my arms. Yes, I said. Shoved. I don't think I could have called it anything else. Lucky I didn't drop the baby. But as far as I'm concerned, that's exactly what the dragon was after. I'm afraid I actually stopped concentrating on what was happening for a while, because I found myself studying the name tag wrapped around the baby girl's little hand. It had Otterly Christine Veronica Hope in tiny letters for all the world to see. Otterly was the name I had always wanted for my daughter, but to which Ronnie had replied, over my dead body. Only Christine was my mother's name, and coincidentally Ronnie's grandmother's name. I later learned it was Dragon's middle name, and of course Veronica was in honor of her mother. I looked over at Veronica and saw that she was sitting up and smiling at me. She gestured to her father, who by this point was snapping his fingers like David Bailey. Sit on the bed with Veronica, John, the old fart, ordered, and I complied. Then we began to pose as loving parents usually do in such pictures. I certainly didn't say Veronica's father was a professional photographer. Did I? Nothing special, just portraits, weddings, and the like. But he knows what he's doing and how to take a flawless shot, so you tend to do what you're told once he starts. After finishing the little photo shoot, Veronica ordered the grandparents out of the room. Yes, I said ordered. I should have realized then how much Veronica would be like her mother. I want to talk to my husband alone for a while, she said, with particular emphasis on the word with. By this time I was out of bed and sitting in a chair in the room, with my daughter in my arms. John put Otterly in her crib and came here. Please, Ronnie asked in her most adorable voice. As soon as we were alone, Ronnie wasn't often this polite to me, so I complied with her request. When I sat down on the edge of the bed, Ronnie reached out and pulled me closer, then laid her head on my chest. To my utter amazement, she started to cry. I was actually prepared for this. Besides the home doctor book we had at home, I had read a lot about childbirth and its aftermath. I knew all about how some of them get postpartum or prepartum depression. Damn me for remembering at that moment. Anyway, I had read a lot about what can happen during labor and was quite prepared for inexplicable tears and tantrums. Suddenly, I realized that Ronnie had spoken, albeit very quietly. I'm sorry I've been such a pig towards you. It's not your fault. I could have said no at any time if I wanted to, but honestly, I didn't want to say no. Ronnie, what are you talking about? I asked. She sat up suddenly and looked me straight in the eye. Wiped out, she replied. I accused you of getting me pregnant, but that was stupid. I wanted it that night as much as you did. The problem was I couldn't figure out why. But when my water broke, I suddenly realized why. John, none of the guys I knew could have done what you did last night. You were so calm, so in control, and knew exactly what to do. I was terrified that Otterly and I were going to die, and you were just John who did what needed to be done and made me feel safe. She said, Veronica, I may have looked calm and nice, but most of the time I was a mess. I explained. She smiled at me again and then kissed my lips, gently this time. I love you, John, she said, breaking the kiss. And I'm going to blow your brains out when it heals. I'm sorry, but the doctor said it'll be a few weeks before we can do it again. Veronica looked at me. Please, don't say that. I know that when you just had a baby, your hormones and everything else are out of whack. You're going to be very emotional for a while until things settle down. We'll see how you feel in a few weeks. Okay? No, John. I'm in complete control of my emotions, and I know exactly what I'm doing. From now on, I'm going to be the best wife I can be to you, she murmured. Yeah, and I believe that. But from what I'd read, I realized that I wouldn't be able to get anything intelligible out of Veronica for a while yet, or until her body was back to normal. I decided it was best to change the subject before Veronica made any more promises she couldn't keep. Can you believe it? Love, honor, and obey. Yeah, I hadn't seen any of those words in months. Did you rename the baby Otterly? I asked, wanting to change the subject. Yes, of course. That's what you wanted to name her, wasn't it? Yeah. But you said you hated it, didn't you? I was being a jerky, John, and I'm sorry. I've always loved that name ever since you first suggested it, but I still blamed you for everything that happened before. Veronica could say anything, but a doctor and 2 nurses entered the room. I think I heard one of the nurses send Grandma and Grandpa to the waiting room, but I'm not sure. Ah, you must be the husband who had to deliver his own child, the doctor said as he walked through the door. From what your wife says, you did a great job. Thanks, Doc, but I just read it out of a book as I went along, I replied, feeling a little awkward. I think we could use a couple of copies of that book. Didn't it tell you how to stitch well? It did, but I wasn't so brave and chickened out. It doesn't matter. You did an excellent job under the circumstances. Anyway, excuse us for a moment. I need to check my work, he said. I gave Ronnie a quick kiss and left the room, following one of the nurses who was taking Otterly away to bathe and change her. I thought it looked like it would be fun, so I asked the nurse if I could help. She grinned. Technically, it's against the rules, but who cares about the rules? You're the guy who delivered the baby himself. Helping Otterly bathe and change her clothes had another advantage. I was far away from my relatives, which I preferred to do whenever possible. They had already returned to Veronica's room when the nurse and I took Otterly back to the room. My folks said goodbye and left almost immediately, and Veronica's folks left shortly after them. Ronnie fed Otterly, and I sat and cuddled the baby until they both fell asleep. Then, after talking to the same nurse again, I tucked Otterly in for the night and headed home. The nurse was a nice girl. I mentally wrote her name down. Yes, I was quite convinced that Veronica's sudden affection for me was a matter of hormones, not heart. I figured I'd be back in the women's market very soon. Apparently, rumors of Otter's birth had already spread because when I stopped by the local pub on the way home to grab a bite to eat, everyone decided that the baby's head needed a good thorough bath. I got completely drunk and ended up spending that night and the next few nights sleeping at friends' houses. I didn't see much point in going to that lonely cottage to be alone. It was nearly a week before Ronnie was allowed to take Otterly home. The whole time she was in the hospital, she continued to feign a crush, and I, for the time being, played along. Frankly, I expected her to flip any day now, and I didn't want to be caught off guard. That first night home, Ronnie insisted I use the other bed in her room. She talked some nonsense about being afraid of not waking up if Otterly cried. On the second day back home, Ronnie caught me off guard again. I walked into the house and smelled a steak frying. I bought you a nice steak from the butcher today, John. It's medium rare, just the way you like it, isn't it? Said Ronnie. It went on like that for the next week or so. Every night I'd come home from work, and Ronnie would cook me some kind of dinner. Well, if she wants to cook, who am I to object? At the end of the week, after Ronnie got out of the hospital, I came home from work. When I opened the garage door, I found I couldn't get the car inside. There were a couple of beds leaning against the wall. What's all this junk in the garage? I asked Ronnie when I got inside. The old beds from our room, she replied. I bought one of those king-size ones for us, and they delivered it today. Yeah, that's what she said. I muttered to myself, thinking, our room and a king-size bed for us? Something definitely smells in the Danish state. Well, what can I do if I'm a damn pessimist? By then, I didn't realize what kind of game Ronnie was playing, but I figured the situation was setting me up. We ate dinner, then Veronica fed Otterly again and put her to bed, or at least until she decided she wanted to nibble on Mommy's nipples again. Actually, I was beginning to envy little Otterly. Ronnie's breasts were a little swollen with milk and looked even more appetizing than the one time I'd been able to put my lips on them. After Veronica tucked Otterly in for the night, she didn't come back downstairs as usual. I was sitting watching the news when I heard Ronnie calling for me. That wasn't unusual, so without answering, I started looking to see what she'd forgotten, Otter's changing bag and such. Grabbing a couple of spare diapers, I headed into the bedroom where I found Ronnie lying on the new bed, waiting for me. No, for some reason, I didn't go up to the room to look at the huge bed Ronnie had bought. I figured she had ordered a king-size bed, so she would have more room to stay away from me. The sight before my eyes when I entered the room was interesting, though not particularly sexy. Veronica was lying on the bed, seductively I suppose, clad in nothing but panties and a nursing bra. "Sorry about the damn bra," she said. "But they've gotten so heavy I have to keep them under control somehow. Anyway," she continued, "I thought you might want to go to bed early." She smiled at me. I'm not sure exactly what I replied. Something like, "Oh, I guess I was shocked." Veronica was inviting me to share a bed with her. "Sorry, but the doctor said we shouldn't do that yet. But we could just cuddle together," Ronnie said thoughtfully and held out her hand, just as she had done at the hospital 2 weeks ago. I didn't move for a moment, but then I saw Ronnie's expression turn sad, and a tear appear in the corner of her eye. "You don't want me because I'm fat and ugly," she began to wail, and that set my brain into action. "It's nothing like that, Ronnie. You just caught me off guard, that's all. Come on, you haven't wanted me in the same room with you since we conceived Otterly," I said, climbing onto the bed and pulling her into a hug. "I told you I was a mess, John. I didn't expect to get pregnant the first time I had sex. All my friends said they had sex all the time and none of them got pregnant. You know, I think I knew Otterly was on her way when we woke up together in that bed," she said, silent long enough to let out a few pitiful sobs. "I was mad at you because we didn't take any precautions. Don't ask me why, it wasn't just up to you, it was up to me. Jesus, Ronnie. I thought you were annoyed that you went to bed with me. I always thought you were so drunk you thought you were with Billy." "What, Billy Trun? You got to be kidding me. Any girl would have to be crazy to go to bed with that idiot. But he was your boyfriend at the time," I reminded her. "The hell he was." Ronnie almost yelled at me. I thought she might have woken up Otterly. Veronica suddenly jumped up and sat on her knees, looking at me lying on the bed. "John, Billy Trun is an arrogant little prick. He thinks his parents' money will let him buy anything he wants, and that goes for most of the girls in town. You know, he's got a book where he details all his escapades. That stupid Conscience showed it to me once. Did the idiot think I wouldn't understand what the little sketch of a cherry next to a girl's name meant? No, John. Once Billy gets into bed with a girl, she becomes a story and has a reputation to match. I was just leading him on for a while, you know. It was convenient having his mom's car to take the girls and me around. But rest assured, Billy would never have been my first." Ronnie sat back and looked at me. I think she was waiting for me to say something. I'm not sure, but I think the best I could get out was another "oh, or something like that. "Johnny, I was looking for you at the party the other night. I was drunk, or I never would have had the courage to do it. But it was you I'd always wanted. When I saw you there that night, I had every intention of sleeping with you. I think I managed to get a few howevers in this time, but I won't swear to it. I'm sorry, John. But honestly, the first 2 times were not pleasant. Silly, really. Why I thought you were an experienced lover, I don't know. But I guess I was a little disappointed with the result. However, the 3rd time we did it that night was really something special. I'm pretty sure that's when we did Otterly. But then you fell asleep, and when we woke up, I realized we hadn't taken any precautions. Then you got up and left and never called me again. I was really upset about it. I had all these dreams about Johnny and Hope being my boyfriend, and you never called once. Now I'm back to talking to Veronica. As I recall that morning you told me to go to hell in no uncertain terms. I just got the hell out of there and kept my head down. Now it was Ronnie's turn to look thoughtful again. "Yeah, I know you did. I was a complete stupid idiot that morning, and I'm sorry. But having sex for the first time is a big step, and when I woke up, I somehow realized I was pregnant. I'm the one who seduced you that night, John, not the other way around. I should have thought about contraception, but it was easier to blame you. I'm sorry. I can be very stupid when I'm emotional. Will you forgive me? I don't know how you've been treating me since then. You know, you haven't been the nicest person to be around. I know it's just, I don't know. I had this idea that you didn't want us to get married and that you were only here with me because of that duty your father keeps talking about. But that day when I yelled at you, I saw the man I loved. Every time I managed to look between my legs, I saw the love in your eyes when you showered Otterly, and you still looked at me afterward. I'm crazy about you, John. Please, God, be just as crazy about me. You know, that's when I realized what I hadn't done. I hadn't admitted to myself that I was crazy about Veronica. I mean, somehow I fell head over heels in love with her. And guess what? 20 years and 3 kids later, we've never looked back. Well, that's not entirely true. In all marriages, there are setbacks from time to time, but nothing that could be called drastic. And just in case Veronica forgets and starts acting like her mother, we have a safe word. All I have to do is say dragon. And Veronica will shut up, throw herself into my arms, and try out her strangulation technique on me again. It seems to end most of our disagreements. Life goes on.